to speak at this event. As you were just hearing, I'm going to talk a little bit about my book today, The Corona Crash, which is available in a number of languages, and hopefully will be available in more as well. But you can also get it in English from wherever you get your books. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about.
Sorry to interrupt you. If there is an end if there is an soon end of the pandemic or the airspace are open, I will invite you in Pakistan for the inaugural and book launching of your own book here.
I would love that. I would love to come to Pakistan. I think that would be absolutely amazing. Thank you for the invitation. Hopefully we'll be able to make that happen.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to talk very briefly about basically the impact that the pandemic is likely to have on young people all around the world, because people in my generation, kind of millennials and younger, have experienced several decades of constant economic crises. And actually that's been more true for those living in the developing world, where crises have been even more frequent than they have in the global north. But most young people have been living through several decades of constant economic crises. And now the pandemic is reshaping the world of work before our eyes. So firstly, what we're likely to see is unemployment for young people is going to remain high for a while. And it's young people that's going to be most impacted by that. This is a real problem for young people because economists talk about this idea of scarring, the impact that a long period of unemployment has on your lifetime earnings. And basically, young people who don't find a job very quickly after they leave university often end up having these scars on their employment records that impact them for the rest of their lives. We also have a much bigger problem here, which is that more young people than ever, especially in the developed world, are getting a good education, but there aren't enough good jobs out there for most people. And this relates to a second challenge, which is actually being exacerbated by the pandemic, which is automation. And automation is really taking away lots of, formerly well-paid, secure jobs, and actually is leading to much higher levels of structural unemployment in economies all over the world and in the global economy. The International Labour Organization, for example, has said for many years that we are not creating enough jobs as a global economy for the size of the global workforce. That's only going to get worse as the pandemic increases, because lots of companies are using this as a moment to cut down on their workforces and replace those workers with automated machinery and various different kinds of technology. And lots of jobs that have recently been outsourced to the developing world to be performed by relatively cheaper labor are being reshored back into the rich world, only to be performed by new technologies and automating and kind of labor-saving technologies. So this problem of not creating enough jobs is going to be with us for a long time. And again, it will have a particular impact on young people. Thirdly, another issue that's become very, very important and prevalent during the pandemic has been the question of housing. And housing for young people is a really significant issue because often as a result of looking for career opportunities, they're the ones that are most likely to be living in cities. And cities are where the housing crisis all over the world actually has become much, much more acute. So in the rich world, for example, you might try to rent a house and it will be, many, many times your annual income. Whereas in the developing world, you will be facing high rents, but also insecurity in your housing, potentially, very bad landlords, poor conditions, an inability to access basic amenities. All of these things make living much, much more difficult, and is especially impacting young people as well. And actually, I see it particularly in bigger cities, the interests of investors and developers are being placed way over and above the interests of tenants and homeowners when we're thinking about how to plan livable cities. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we are living in the age of climate breakdown. And this is something that is obviously very clearly going to impact young people because it is going to change the world before our very eyes, and because we are the ones that are most likely to be living with the consequences. But again, it's also going to be young people in the developing world who are going to be impacted much more by these trends, because climate change is already with many states in the global south. Island nations, low-lying nations, nations at risk of desertification, all of these people people around the world are experiencing the effects of climate change already, and we don't have the infrastructure at the level of the international economy to be able to deal with and tackle these problems. And that relates to a much bigger set of problems about how we need to redesign the international economy for an age in which all these problems have become so prevalent. One of the biggest challenges, again, that we're going to be seeing as we come out of this crisis is debt in the global south. We've seen the biggest outflow of capital from the developing world that has ever been recorded in history. And some states are already struggling to repay those debts, whether those are owed to, private creditors or to other states. And currently, there is no apparatus that exists at the level of the global economy to deal with states that are unable to pay their debts. And what we could end up seeing is what we saw after the financial crisis, where, as just one example, a country like Zambia, which was unable to pay its debts, had its debts bought up by a vulture fund, which then sued the government and extracted millions of pounds worth of returns from Zambian citizens. This is quite clearly not a sustainable way to manage the global economy. And international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank currently aren't really approaching the problem as seriously as they should be. If we're going to be able to tackle climate breakdown, if we're going to be able to rebuild the global economy after this crisis, then we're going to need some much bigger transfers from global north to global south. And we're going to need international organizations to step up and provide the funding that these states are going to need to recover and to tackle climate breakdown. One of the biggest challenges, I think, when we're thinking about all of these, different issues I've mentioned today, how they affect young people, is that, and I think, this is an issue that we see all around the world, the massive gap that exists between young people who are mobilizing and organizing and demanding big changes and our political leaders. Often there's a big gap between, the demands of young people and political leaders who tend to be much older. This is a big issue in the global north, certainly, because there is a much larger, older population. But it's also true in many parts of the global south. I mean, especially if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, countries like Uganda, where you have the youngest population in the world and a very, very old president who is, continuing to, who's just won another election, despite that being marred by all sorts of irregularities. So all of these questions really come down to young people being able to kind of organize and mobilize and demand a different way of organizing society and our political systems, which is why I'm really happy to be here today to be talking with so many young people from all around the world about how we might tackle these challenges and work together to do so. So thank you very much, Ambassador. That's all from me.
Grace, you are always unique.